let's get started on Chapter 1, Overview and Installation. In this chapter, we will look at the purpose of Windows Server 2012, the additions of Server 2012, installation, configuration, navigating Server 2012, installation methods, and Server Core. Windows Server 2012 is a network operating system, which is also called a NOS. And as you know, in a local area network, clients have client operating systems, such as Windows 7, and servers have network operating systems. So the purpose of a network operating system is to control and coordinate the hardware, software, and data components of a server. And that server can function as a file server or a login server, which Microsoft calls a domain controller, or a DHCP server, which issues IP addresses to workstations. So when we use the term server role, the role describes the function that the server performs. It might be acting as a file server, it might be acting as a domain controller, it might be acting as a DHCP server. And there are three categories of server roles: directory services, infrastructure, and applications. The directory services roles include a domain controller, which is a login server, or a certificate server. And infrastructure roles include DHCP server, DNS server, Windows Deployment Server, Windows Server Update Services server, and Remote Access server. And application server roles include web server, print server, file server, or remote desktop server. So Windows Server 2012 is a network operating system that can act as a platform on which you can install different roles such as file server, domain controller, and DHCP server. Let's look at the different editions of Server 2012. If we go to Microsoft's website to 2012 Server, we will see that there are 4 editions: Foundation, Essentials, Standard, and Data Center. Now, Foundation and Essentials are for real small businesses, whereas Standard and Data Center is what most of us will be working on, and that will be used in medium-sized and large businesses. Let's compare Foundation, Essentials, Standard, and Data Center. Foundation and Essentials are just used for very small businesses. They support 1 and 2 CPUs respectively. They can only support 32 or 64 gig of RAM. They don't support virtualization at all, and they only support a 1-layer Active Directory domain. But if we look at Standard and Data Center, we can see that Standard supports 64 processors and 4 terabytes of RAM and 2 virtual machines, and of course it supports Active Directory services. And then if we look at Data Center is what you would install on a big data center server, and it can support up to 64 physical CPUs, 4 terabytes of RAM, and unlimited virtual machines, and we will talk more about virtualization in Chapter 7. So 4 different editions. Most of us will be working with the Standard and Data Center editions. Let's look at some of these prices. If we look at a Standard edition, we can see prices start at about $679. Conversely, at the other extreme, here is a Data Center edition that supports multiple CPUs. That's $10,000 for the software alone. And then, of course, a client access license. You have to buy 1 client access license for each person who's going to connect at $39 per user. So you can see there is a wide amount of pricing in purchasing Windows 2012 Server. You can download a free copy of Server 2012, and I recommend that you do that. Microsoft wants you to, because they want you to install it and like it, and then buy the license for it. So we go to www.microsoft.com to the page for 2012, and when we select Try It, we go to the TechNet Evaluation Center, where we can download the Evaluation Windows Server 2012. It is a full-blown version which you can use. And then if we download it, we download the ISO image, and then we burn that ISO image to a DVD, and then we can use the DVD to install the operating system, which brings us around to installation. So let's look at system requirements and the steps involved in installation. The system requirements, the bare minimum, is 1.4 gigahertz 64-bit CPU, a half a gig of RAM, 32 gig disk space, a DVD reader, and of course a monitor. Now, this is just the bare minimum. Most laptops have more powerful processors than that. It's really recommended that you get more than just the bare minimum. For even a small server, you might want to have a quad-core 2 gigahertz processor and 8 gig of RAM, just for a small server. And if you had a big old data center server, as we do here at CCBC, it might have up to 64 CPUs, 4 terabyte of RAM, and multiple 2 terabyte hard disks. Now let's move on to performing a clean installation. To perform a clean installation, you take the DVD, which you downloaded from Microsoft, you put it in the DVD drive in the server. Then you turn the server on. When you turn the server on, it boots. And when it says press any key to boot from the DVD, you press any key. And that causes the server to boot from the DVD. And then it starts the Windows setup program. We click on Next to install Server 2012. And we will select the Data Center Edition with Graphical User Interface, followed by Next. We accept the licensing terms, followed by Next. And then it says Custom or Upgrade. Well, I don't want to do either one. This is a first time install. This is a clean install. We don't want to do an upgrade. So for a clean install, you select Custom. For a first time install, you select Custom. Then you select the disk that it's going to be installed on, followed by Next. And then it copies the files from the DVD to the hard disk on the server. Then it reboots. The system restarts. And you don't press any key to boot from the DVD. And then when it comes up, the first thing we have to do is assign an administrator password. So I assign an administrator password. Don't forget it. Click on Next. And then I log in using that administrator password that I just created. And now I can see I'm logged in to Windows Server 2012. The bottom left-hand corner, if I select Server Manager and I select Local Server, we can see that this computer name is a randomly generated name. When we do the install, the computer has a randomly generated name. So after we install the files from the DVD, then we run the initial configuration tasks. And when we say running initial configuration tasks, we mean assigning a computer name, an IP address if necessary, and assigning the time zone. So under Server Manager, we select Local Server and we select the computer name, which is the randomly generated name, and we click on that, and under Change, we delete the computer name, and then we type in the computer name that we are going to assign, call it a host name, And I will call this one server 1. If I click on more, it allows me to type in the DNS suffix. And in my case, that would be ccbcmd.edu, followed by OK and OK. And it wants me to reboot, but not yet, because I need to assign an IP address. I need to assign a static IP address because I plan to make this a domain controller later. So under Ethernet, I click under IP4 address, and there's my Ethernet adapter. If I right-click on the Ethernet adapter and I select Properties, and I select Properties for TCP/IP version 4, you can see that the IP address is dynamically assigned by DHCP. I select the radio button that says use the following IP address, and then I type in an IP address which is compatible with my local area network. So you would type in an IP address which is compatible with your local area network. If you're just installing this totally standalone, doesn't matter what IP address you type in. Then I type in a subnet mask, and as you can see, this is a Class C private network. Then I type in the default gateway. If you're at home, this would be the IP address of your wireless router. If you're at work, the default gateway is the IP address of the router. And we have not yet installed DNS, but many of you will type for the DNS server the IP address of the default gateway. Doesn't matter what you type in right now, because this is just, we haven't gotten to DNS yet. Then I click on OK and on Close, and I close, and if I scroll to the far right, we will see the time zone is set for Pacific time. If I click on time zone, I can select change time zone. If I select the drop down, I select -5 hours Greenwich Mean Time, which is US Eastern Time, and I click on OK. Now, remember, we might have given it a new computer name, but it's not really going to be assigned until we restart that computer. Got to restart the computer for the new computer name to kick in. So to restart the computer, there are a couple ways to restart a computer. You can use the graphical user interface, or you can use the command line interface. We will use both. They have something called charms. Let me show that to you. To do a shutdown using the charms. What you do is you move your cursor to the far top right of the screen, and there's really nothing to see to click on, but if you just wave your cursor around, then these charms pop up. And charms is just another word for icon. And if you click on the charm that says settings, I can select power, and then it allows me to select restart or shutdown, and I would select shutdown. So one way of shutting it down is using the charms. And then you can also shut down from the command line, and as you know, as you get to more advanced levels of computing, you use the command line more and more. To shut down from the command line, you have to press the Windows key on the keyboard. If you see, there's no start button on the far left here. No start button. So we've got to press the Windows key. If we press the Windows key on the keyboard, this takes us to the Metro interface. And then to get to the command prompt, I type CMD. I don't have to click on start or anything. I just type right here, CMD. I type CMD, and it brings up the command prompt. I click on the command prompt, and now I'm at the command prompt. To shut down and restart the computer, I type the command shutdown /R. R means restart. And then I'll press the enter key, and when I do, it'll restart the computer. I press the enter key, shuts down the system, reboots. I do not press any key to boot from the DVD, and then I log in as the administrator. If I go to Server Manager, I can then see that the server name which I have typed in has now been applied to this new server, and there's the IP address as well. So installation is an easy process. You boot to the DVD, the files are copied over, you reboot. Then when you reboot, You perform the initial configuration tasks, which we will cover in greater detail in Chapter 2. We give it a computer name and a DNS suffix, an IP address, if necessary, and we specify the time zone. Now let's look at navigating Windows Server 2012. And I know a lot of these things we're going to look at you have seen before. Let's look at the desktop, Windows Explorer, Server Manager, Computer Management Console, the Metro interface, Control Panel, and the Command Prompt. Now this is the desktop right here. And if I want to look at the files which are on the C drive, to get to the Windows Explorer, I click on the yellow icon of a file down here, and the Windows Explorer allows me to look at the files which are on the hard disk. If I want to get to Server Manager, on the bottom left-hand corner, I click on the bottom left-hand corner, I click on Server Manager, and as you know, Server Manager allows me to install various roles, which we will do later. And if I go over to Tools, and I move down to Computer Management, if I click on Computer Management, it brings up the Computer Management Console. And this looks nearly identical to Windows 7. There's the Task Manager, there is Event Viewer, there is Disk Management where I can create and delete and format partitions and volumes. Nearly identical to Windows 7. And then if I want to get to Control Panel, notice there is no Start button on the bottom left. So to get to Control Panel, I press the Windows key on the keyboard. If I press the Windows key on the keyboard, it brings up the Metro interface. On the bottom left, there is the Control Panel. If I click on the Control Panel, you can see that the Control Panel for Server 2012 is nearly identical to Windows 7. There's System and Security, Network and the Internet, Hardware, and Programs. Nearly identical to Windows 7. And then, as we've already discussed, to get to the Command Prompt, you press the Windows key on the keyboard, and then you just type right here, CMD, and that brings up the Command Prompt, and that allows me to issue commands from the Command Prompt. So, briefly, we looked at the desktop, the Windows Explorer, not to be confused with the Internet Explorer, Server Manager, which we will use a lot to add roles and services, the Computer Management Console, which is nearly identical to Windows 7, the Metro interface. Now that's what Windows 8 looks like. You don't have to use it much, really. Control Panel, which is nearly identical to Windows 7, and then getting to the Command Prompt. Now let's look at different installation methods. Clean installation, an upgrade, and an advanced method called migration. Now we've already done the clean installation. So what's the difference between the clean installation and the upgrade? When you do a clean installation, it wipes the disk. It installs a new copy of the operating system, and then you, the administrator, are required to assign a computer name and DNS suffix, static IP address, install services and applications, and of course create users and assign them passwords. That's what we do on a clean install. But with an upgrade is where we already have an existing copy of Windows 2008 Server. An upgrade does not wipe the disk, it retains all user data files. It overwrites the operating system and replaces 2008 with 2012. But the computer name is the same, the IP address is the same, the services and applications are retained, and all of the user accounts and data files are retained. So let's look at the steps in performing an upgrade from 2008 to 2012. I've got a copy of Windows 2008 Server, so I take the DVD that we downloaded from Microsoft and I put it in the DVD reader, and it runs autoplay, and I select Run Setup. When I select Run Setup, it allows me to select Install Now, and then it copies the temporary files. Then I select the edition that I want to install, in this case, Data Center with the graphical user interface, followed by Next. I accept the licensing agreement, followed by Next. And then here is where I do not select the lower option. I select the upper option that says Upgrade, install Windows, and keep files, settings, and applications. So I select that one. I click on that, and then it proceeds to copy the files from the DVD to our server. Once the files have been copied, then it does a restart, and it reboots, and then I log in as the administrator, and then I will see that all the usernames has been retained, the computer name is the same, and the IP address is the same. When you do an upgrade, unlike a clean install, it does not wipe the disk. It retains all user data files. You don't have to assign a computer name. You don't have to assign an IP address. You don't have to install roles and services because the existing services and applications which you have installed are retained. And you don't have to create new user accounts. All user accounts and passwords are retained. So what we've looked at is clean installation and upgrade. And in the next section, we will cover a more advanced method called migration, which we will cover in part 2 of chapter 1. And this concludes the end of part 1, chapter 1.